Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for watching today's session on flexible work opportunities, a guide to finding part-time employment. My name is Shannon Ammer. I'm the Career Services Program Specialist here at Fanshawe College. I work in the Employment and Student Entrepreneurial Services Department. We're located in D Block 1063. So we're going to talk a little bit about part-time resumes and cover letters. So when you are applying to a part-time position, you want to follow that same processes as you would if you were applying for a full-time position as well. So that also means you want to make sure that you're being very thoughtful in your writing and you're writing a well-crafted resume and cover letter. You also want to remember that not all part-time positions are going to require you to write a cover letter, but it's always a good idea to write one if possible. A great cover letter allows you to show that employer that you are very interested in that role. You get to add a little bit more of your personality, and it may make a difference on you getting that particular position as well. So when it comes to writing a part-time cover letter, you can see here there's an example on the one side of the screen, but with your part-time cover letter, you want to make sure in your very first paragraph, you introduce yourself, and you always want to make sure that you express not only your interest for the position, but you also want to make sure that you explain how you heard about that particular position. So that means even if you have a referral, if somebody has referred you to apply to that position, you want to make sure you mention that right away in that first paragraph as well. In your second and third paragraphs of your cover letter writing, you want to really specify your qualifications and making those connections between that job posting and the skills that you can bring to that particular employer. So that means looking at all the skills the employers are looking for and finding a way to incorporate those skills and demonstrating those skills in your second and third paragraphs. For your final paragraph, you really want to make sure you explain how they can connect with you, providing your phone number and your email address as well. And lastly, you always want to make sure that you close off in a professional manner, which always includes something like sincerely, kind regards, and then your signed signature as well. So for your part-time resume, you want to make sure you include all this information in your resume. So that includes your first and last name, your contact information. Your contact details are an easy section to fill in. So make sure you only include the information that you check regularly so that you can be contacted very easily by these employers. Your contact details on your resume should always be professional. So that means you want to really avoid those jokey email addresses like coolboys@email.com or something similar. So just make sure that you have a professional email address. And also, don't worry if you don't possess or have much work experience. You can still create a resume without having work experience by really emphasizing your skills and education as well. But just make sure on your resume, you have, again, your contact information above. You have a highlight section. You'll have an education section, your work experience section. You can also include a section on accomplishments if you feel like you would like to. And lastly, you can always include other sections, which might be something like community involvement, in that nature. And just keep in mind when it comes to your part-time resume, it's always between 1 to 2 pages. If you are going to the second page of your resume, you want to make sure that your resume on the second page has your contact information on the same location as you would on page 1, and is never printed double-sided. It is always 2 pages on its own. So when you are starting to identify your skills on your resume, you really want to make sure you start identifying what your transferable skills are and how can you use these transferable skills on your resume. So if you are somebody that has limited experience, just think of the little skills that you develop in everyday life that you can include and translate that into what we call a full writing skills statement on your resume. So for example, let's say that you've worked at a restaurant or you've taken orders at a fast food restaurant. How could you implement that into your resume? You could say something like used strong communication skills to accurately pass on important information. Let's say you've worked in a retail store. What could you say? You could say something like demonstrated excellent customer service skills, providing feedback and proposing solutions to customers' inquiries. Let's say you've worked at a daycare looking after children, or you babysat. You could say something like effectively applied critical thinking and logical problem solving to ensure a cooperative work environment. And lastly, maybe you're somebody who's hands-on. You've built a deck or a fence. You could say something like worked as part of a team, contributing ideas and providing support to make where common goals were met. So just think about all those transferable skills. When we talk about transferable skills, it means one skill that you developed in one area that you can now transfer that skill to any area of employment. You could develop transferable skills in the classroom, previous part-time jobs, other full-time jobs that you've had. Look at maybe some volunteer opportunities. Maybe you're part of a team sport. Look at all those skills and just make sure you've translated that into your resume. So with your part-time resume, I know we said this a little bit earlier, a part-time resume is going to be a simpler, more general resume in comparison to, let's say, when you graduate and you're ready to land that full-time job, then your postgraduate resume is going to be more in-depth and targeted. So what we mean by that is your part-time resume really needs to be simplified when you are looking for those part-time roles. And then when it comes upon graduation is where you're really going to have all those bells and whistles, really making sure that you're selling yourself for those positions. What are the benefits of part-time work? Obviously, part-time work allows greater flexibility in comparison to a full-time job. It's a great way for you to earn money for school and obviously assist with all those living expenses that we have. And lastly, it's going to allow you to strengthen your resume and build that professional network. So the number one question we get asked often is, how long does it take you to find a part-time job? Obviously, the length of time is going to vary on many different factors. It could be your qualifications that you have for the job you're applying for. It could be the industry that you are trying to target. It could be the location of where you are searching for those jobs. And lastly, it's always going to be about the competition that's available for those positions. So on average, we usually say finding a part-time job in Canada can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. And it's always going to be different for all of us because it depends on what type of work are we looking for. Is our job search being too narrow and only wanting to work for certain companies? So that obviously is going to affect the length of time it will take you to find a part-time job. The next couple of slides, we're going to talk about the importance of working off the books. So as students, we want to make sure that you're not working off the table because there are some risks with that. So why working under the table can really hurt you and why you don't want to be doing that. So when you're working off the table and you're not using your social insurance number, there's a couple things we want to remind you of. The number one thing is if you get injured, you're on your own. So if you get injured, you're on your own. That means a job that pays you cash without you filing it against your social insurance number. You're also not paying those appropriate, what we call workplace compensation benefits to WSIB within Ontario. This means that if you get hurt in that job, there's no way for you to make a claim for financial assistance from workers when you are being paid a job under the table. So keep that in mind. That's the number one. Number two is if let's say you're on a work permit or you're applying for your permanent residency, you could get deported. So working under the table can also pose other risks in many different ways. So number one is if you're on a visitor visa, working is illegal regardless of whether or not you work under the table. If you're here on a work permit, working with someone who doesn't have a work permit is illegal. If you're on a study permit, working more the hours than what you're allowed is considered illegal as well. So you always want to keep that in mind when you are working for a particular employer. And lastly, number three is your work won't qualify you for EI or CPP. And so what that means, when you work for a legitimate employer who files your income against your social insurance number, the hours that you work are always counted towards your eligibility for what we call unemployment insurance. And that works towards your Canada Pension Plan benefit in the future. So if you work for a cash job, those hours are not counted. And this can mean you won't be able to, help you in the future when you might be most vulnerable. So always think of those 3 steps. If you are working under the table getting those cash opportunities, we want to advise you that don't do that, because in the long run, it could, have significant repercussion. So the next couple slides, we're going to talk about how to find those part-time jobs, and we're going to work through these steps to get you in that right direction for you. So step number 1 is you want to start off by considering your schedule. Why do we have that listed as number 1? Because you want to consider your schedule and the hours that you want to work. So for example, if you're a student who has classes on certain days in the mornings and other days in the afternoon, you'll have to be able to choose your shifts based on your class schedule. Nobody should be missing your class schedule to go ahead and work a part-time position. So really factor in your class schedules as it's done per term. You'll have your fall term, you'll have your winter term, and your summer term, and you'll need to make sure you communicate that with those particular employers. Step number 2 is you want to make sure you update your resume and online profiles. So before you apply for any positions, you want to make sure you update your resume and make sure that your references are aware that a prospective employer may be contacting them. You should always draft a customized cover letter and resumes for every position you're applying for, and having an updated base document to work from will only make the process obviously much faster and easier for you. You always want to make sure that you consider updating your social media platforms as well to always reflect your qualifications, your skills and experience. And also check your social media profiles to make sure you delete or hide some of your posts or videos or photos that could possibly potentially hurt a job application as well. You always want to make sure that your resume highlights your most marketable skills that you have. And you always want to make sure that it is obviously tailored and targeted to those industries that you're really wanting to work for. You can always include other activities that have kept you busy, such as projects that you have worked on, and even include those volunteer opportunities. Employers view 41% of employers view volunteering as like a paid work experience. So that's the number 1 thing employers do like to see on resumes. So if you are somebody that has volunteer work, make sure you add that community involvement in your resume. If you're somebody that would like to participate in volunteer activities, the first step I can give to you is to visit the FSU, the Fanshawe Student Union page, to see if there's opportunities on campus. If not, you can also check Pillar Nonprofit, which Fanshawe has partnered with, that does have volunteer opportunities in London and surrounding areas, which can all be found on the FSU website. Step number 3 is you want to reach out to your network. So you want to contact individuals in your professional network to find out if anyone knows about a part-time position that could possibly suit you. Your network is always going to include friends, family members, maybe former colleagues, your professors as well. Even if no one in your network knows about a part-time position, they may also know someone at a company who's looking for a part-time staff as well. Step number 4 is part-time job postings. So you want to make sure you do your research and make a list of all the employers who are hiring new staff. Look for positions that ultimately interest you, that you can find obviously part-time listings on various places. What we have listed here for you is just somewhere to get you started. Keep in mind the Fanshawe job site and other online job boards obviously have many different postings. So check the job posting websites that suit your best need for the positions you're looking for. But also keep in mind that friends and family members may also know about positions and could consider you. Also speak to your classmates in your classroom. Maybe they're working for a particular company. Maybe you could get a referral from that classmate sitting next to you in your classroom. The other thing we want to mention is you can also visit local businesses to ask about any vacancies they may have as well. When you are applying to these jobs, use online job boards as a basis, but always make sure you're doing your research. So if you find a company that you want to apply for, do some read up on the company, do your research, read about the company's mission statement. You should never just be submitting an application without doing some form of research. And you also want to make sure you're being cautious of those job scams as well. Step number 5 is you want to make a list of your favorite job postings and do your research. I know I touched on that very briefly on the last screen, but once you've created that list, research those job functions and the company's culture, just that you can make sure that it matches what your values are. Let's say if you're somebody who's more laid, you want more of an employment opportunity that's more laid back work environment, then check that company's website and read the employee reviews on the company's online site to see if that company is considered more of a casual or formal company as well. Step number 6 is you want to apply for those job postings. So it's obviously so beneficial to make sure that you send a customized cover letter and resume for every position you're applying for, because it ultimately allows you to highlight how you can contribute to that company and how you meet that particular company's requirements. So let's say, for instance, maybe you could describe a successful team project that you worked on as a sign of your ability to work well with other people. That is the bonus of having a cover letter attached to a resume, is your resume is very structured. In your cover letter, you can add a little bit more of your personality, and you can talk a little bit more about team projects that can show that you've worked well with other people as well. Step number 7 is I will follow up on all your applications. Why is this so important? It is the number one thing that you must be doing every time you submit an application. So keeping track of your job applications will help you to do a form of follow-up with them. Even if you have not received any feedback for a particular position, and let's say it's been several weeks, you can still reach out to them to find out the status of your application. This is ultimately going to be able to show the employers that you are a proactive individual. With that, we also want to come with a couple factors. So when you are doing a follow-up for a particular position that you've submitted an application for, you do not want to be contacting the employer multiple times in a row. If you contact them, you want to leave them a voicemail and give them a couple days for them to respond. And when we talk about follow-up, you want to follow up once a week, not once a day, because you don't want to be on the employer's case. The employers are busy. You want to be respectful of their time. On average, I will tell you when it comes to following up on an application, we usually say you should follow up on an application about 5 to 7 business days from the closing date or from the time that you sent them an application if there was no closing date or you just handed in an application to a particular employer. So 5 to 7 days. Business days. So that means we're not going to be counting Saturdays and Sundays. So use the 5 to 7 days as a rule of thumb on when you should be following up with those particular employers. Step number 8 is you want to be honest about your availability. So once you apply to that, advertised position, whether you've seen it online or you submit an application in person, you want to make sure you show or mention your availability in that job application or that interview. So it's so important to be honest as possible, as you don't want to get a position that doesn't allow you to suit with your schedule, and that means your class schedule. So your classes always come first. So for example, let's say you can't work during the day, do your classes, then you should be making that very clear on your application. If the job posting is looking for a full-time position and you are only looking to work part-time, then you shouldn't be applying to a full-time position. Many of us might be international students. We may have conditions on our study permit that only allows us to work 20 hours a week. So you need to make sure that you're being honest about your availability and make sure that your classes always come first. Step number 9 is you want to make sure that you show your commitment. Obviously, some employers will prefer candidates who want to find part-time employment versus other candidates who are wanting, taking work as, let's say, a temporary measure until they find something like a permanent employment opportunity. So take advantage of highlighting this in your preference, is that your part-time work in your cover letter during your interview. Really highlight that you are strictly only looking for part-time work, because that could be beneficial to you, as many employers will be looking for part-time versus full-time. So really do make sure you mention that in your cover letter and obviously during your interview as well. Step number 10 is you want to be dedicated to the job search process. So obviously applying for a part-time position is going to take time and effort. as it would as if you were applying to a full-time position, as we said at the very beginning of our workshop. You want to make sure that when you are applying for these positions, let's say you're applying for several positions before you're actually successful, you want to make sure that you're being diligent and determined, having that determination in your job search. That can be an effective way in you obtaining those positions that you want. So just understand that job search takes time and effort, and it's not always going to be a smooth process, but you just need to be diligent with that process. And know that there might be some bumpy roads along the way, but you have to just make sure you stay on that path, and do make sure that you do know that you have resources on campus that we can assist you with that. Career Services, FSU, Counseling and Student Life are all places that you can obtain some assistance if needed. Step number 11 is you want to take the interview seriously. So you want to make sure that you're dressing appropriately for that job and that industry that you're applying for. If you're not sure about what the dress code is, it's always better to err on the formal side of things. Dressing appropriately is going to show the employer that you are serious about that job and that whole job hunting process. You always want to make sure that you aim about, let's say, 15 minutes before the scheduled interview. Being early allows you to relax before the interview, allows you to show the interviewer that you are punctual, and you're a reliable candidate. You want to make sure that when you meet the interviewer, you want to make sure you start off using that firm handshake, giving that eye contact as well. You should always make sure that you're being polite and you're speaking clearly. You always want to make sure that you're paying attention to your posture and gestures, and obviously make sure that you're always, having a smile, because that can then inflect some confidence in you as well, even when you feel nervous as well. You can ask questions about the company, about the position, to obviously show your interest. Asking questions is obviously going to help you find out whether or not, before accepting the position, if this would be a company that you would want to work for. So just make sure that you're doing those interview preparations. Always a good way is to make sure you go on your FOL website. When you link to resources and you select Career Co-op and CCR, from there you can select, there's a toolkit. In that toolkit, we have some examples on commonly asked questions during an interview. That is a great way to practice some commonly asked questions during an interview. One that I can tell you that comes on the top of my mind is, tell me about yourself. Be prepared to have answers and responses to those commonly asked questions. That's ultimately going to help you when you're sitting in that hot seat, when you're trying to scramble a response. So really do practice that commonly asked questions. We also have some other systems that you can use as well. There's interviewing.com that you can use as well. It's an online platform that you can work on your interview skills as well. Step number 12 is you want to follow up after the interviewer with a thank you note. So after you interview, you want to make sure you send a thank you note. Typically, that could be by email to the interview panelists. So make sure you get all those contact information for everyone that is on that panel. You want to make sure you thank them for the time that they took to interview you. You always want to express your interest and why you are a good fit for that job. And lastly, it gives you an opportunity that if there's something you forgot to mention in the interview, you could always mention this in your follow-up email as well. This shows that that particular employer that's doing the hiring, it's going to show them that you are committed and respectful. So just make sure that you do that within 24 hours from your interview. It's always a good note to try to do it on the same day, but no later than a 24-hour rule. Now we're just going to talk about some important takeaways. These are just a few things you want to remember. So when you are applying for a job, whether you are attending a career fair, you want to keep in mind that it's not a group event when you're applying for positions. It's strictly not a group event. It is an individual event. So when you are handing in those resumes, do make sure that you're being present on your own. Just keep in mind that the college has career fairs. There's always one that happens in March, usually at the end of the month, and then there'll be one in September at the end of the month. So please stay tuned to your FOL email addresses to get more information on career fairs. just make sure you do your research on the employers you want to apply to, and just make sure that you are doing it as a sole event. You don't want to be going to a booth or handing in a resume with a group of people. You want to make sure that you're doing that individually, that you can make sure you're making that best first impression. You don't, I know we mentioned this earlier, but you don't want to be sending emails, employers emails with links to Google Drive to attach your resume. You want to make sure that when you are following those instructions very clearly on that job description. As the second comment states here, strike while the iron is hot. Jobs can be filled in minutes. So you want to make sure you receive communication from an employer, that you respond to them right away on that same day. So if you listed, as we said earlier, your contact information on your resume, you've listed your phone number and email, you need to make sure you're checking that daily throughout the day. So if an employer contacts you to set up a time for an interview, you want to make sure you're responding as soon as possible and as quickly as possible and on that same day. The other thing we want to mention is if an employer asks you for certain days and times that you are available. I know we talked about this, but this is the number one thing employers say, that students say they're available from morning to night, Monday through Sunday. If you are a full-time student, there's no way you're available 7 days a week, unless your schedule allows you to be doing that. So you really want to make sure that you give them the days and times that you are available for your class schedule for that term that you are working. Let's say you have a class that runs on a Tuesday, like we said here, from 2 to 8. Well, then the only time that you might be able to work is maybe if there's an early shift, maybe you could do an 8:30 to 12:30, giving yourself back to school on campus. And lastly, when it comes to interview preparation, I know we touched on this a little bit, but you want to make sure you're dressing for success. So regardless if your interview is in person or if it's virtually, you want to make sure you're dressing for success. So that means not wearing jeans, not wearing, comfortable clothing. Nobody says you have to wear a suit and a tie, but you want to make sure that you look, professional. You always want to make sure that you're arriving early. You want to make sure you smile. You want to make sure you're providing that eye contact and you're providing them that firm handshake once you're meeting them before and after the interview as well. So this brings us to our very last screen here. I hope everyone found this session. Please do reach out to us in Career Services. Visit us on our events webpage for other career workshops that are available. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Take care.